Bastogne, the siege of the Screaming Eagles, the calm before the siege. In the biting cold of December 1944, the Ardennes forest lay silent beneath a thick blanket of snow. The men of the 101st Airborne Division believed they were headed for rest after months of relentless combat across France. They deserved it, exhausted, battle-worn and longing for warmth. Yet as their trucks rolled into the quiet Belgian town of Bastogne, they had no idea they were marching straight into one of the most desperate battles in American history. Snow fell softly on the cobblestone streets, muffling all sounds except the distant rumble of artillery. Villagers peeked from windows, faces pale with fear and curiosity. To the paratroopers it seemed peaceful, too peaceful. Many had fought in Normandy, Carentan and Market Garden. They had learned that silence was often the deadliest sound on a battlefield. At the command post, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, interim commander of the 101st, studied maps with his officers. Reports were vague, but German lines had begun to move. It was supposed to be winter, a time for rest. Yet the enemy concentrated armor, artillery and troops, calm as ever. McAuliffe ordered his men to hold position. "If they come," he said, "we will stop them here." Soldiers dug defenses around the 7 main roads leading into Bastogne. Trenches were carved into the frozen ground, biting through gloves and boots. Supplies were scarce, and temperatures plunged below zero each night. Yet morale remained high. These were the Screaming Eagles, proud of America's finest. They laughed, shared cigarettes, and trusted that help would arrive if needed. What they didn't know was that they were directly in the path of Hitler's final gamble, the Ardennes offensive, a surprise attack aimed at splitting the Allied lines in two. The Germans came in force, tanks, mechanized infantry and veteran SS divisions. Bastogne, the small Belgian crossroads, was the key to it all. By nightfall on December 17th, the first distant flashes appeared on the horizon. The thunder of artillery rolled through the valley like an approaching storm. The men looked up at the sky, snowflakes glinting in the firelight. The rest they had hoped for had vanished. The Battle of Bastogne had begun, surrounded. The cold became even more merciless. Wind cut through heavy coats and makeshift trenches, carrying the metallic scent of gunpowder and snow. Each gust seemed to announce the enemy's approach. The 101st Airborne, isolated and encircled, quickly realized Bastogne was no longer just strategic. It was a prison of ice and fire. The first German units appeared at dawn, moving silently through snow-covered trees. Heavy tanks groaned across the frozen ground, and infantry advanced like shadows, rifles raised. The sound of steel against stone and the crunch of snow under enemy boots shattered the deadly silence the paratroopers had once felt. At the command post, McAuliffe remained resolute. Messengers arrived, some limping, others breathless from the cold, bringing news that Allied reinforcements were hours away. McAuliffe merely shook his head, a brief, firm smile on his lips. "Our positions are strong. Let them come. We will not retreat." Orders spread rapidly. Every street, every corner, every trench was reinforced. Barricades of furniture, sandbags and debris turned Bastogne into a defensive labyrinth. The air was thick with smoke from fires, gunpowder and hope. Soldiers laughed nervously, shared memories of home, and clung to sanity amid the looming storm of death. By the night of December 18th, the moonlight reflected off the snow, and the distant sound of engines and explosions grew closer. German troops encircled the town, cutting supply routes and isolating the defenders. The sense of siege made the cold almost tangible, a silent pressure against every soldier, reminding them there was no escape. Yet, amid the tension and fear, fierce determination burned. Bastogne was small, but the 101st knew their reputation depended on holding fast. Every shot fired, every barricade held, every order followed was a silent declaration they would not be crushed. The cold and the silence were treacherous, but the paratroopers' courage was unyielding. And as the moon disappeared behind clouds, the battle transformed the peaceful Belgian town into a frozen inferno, where only willpower and blood kept the Screaming Eagles alive. The fight for Bastogne's heart, the dawn of December 19th, brought the roar of war. Snow was now stained grey and red, littered across streets where paratroopers manned barricades. Each corner became a point of conflict, each trench a fragile line between life and death. German tanks advanced slowly, crushing debris and shattering doors of abandoned houses. Infantry followed closely, rifles ready, grenades in hand, while paratroopers fired from windows and doors, moving quickly between buildings, laying down covering fire. Each shot was precise. Each explosion echoed through narrow streets, turning Bastogne into a labyrinth of smoke, ice, and steel. At the command post, McAuliffe remained calm. Messengers arrived, some limping, others breathless, bringing news of simultaneous German attacks on multiple fronts. Yet he responded only with concise orders: reinforce the central square, protect the improvised hospital, hold supply lines intact. No step back, he said, his voice cutting through the battle's roar. Isolated soldiers found courage in each other. They learned to trust the man beside them, even when death seemed inevitable. A sniper held a street against an entire German company. A squad of grenadiers set improvised traps, delaying enemy advances. Every action, every sacrifice, kept Bastogne alive a little longer. By afternoon, explosions shook the town centre. A German tank tried to breach the main square, but was struck by an improvised anti-tank weapon, its smoking hull becoming a symbol of hope for the defenders. German war cries mingled with American commands as battle danced its deadly rhythm over the snow. And yet, amid the chaos, humanity endured. Soldiers shared warm coffee, laughing nervously, remembering home. A distant Christmas song drifted through a ruined street, a cruel reminder that war never paused, yet hope persisted even in horror. Night fell again over Bastogne. The city, surrounded, frozen and bleeding, still resisted. The 101st Airborne knew that as long as they stood, Bastogne would remain more than a point on a map. It would stand as a symbol of unbreakable courage, resistance and reinforcements. The days blurred into snow, fire and steel. Bastogne was frozen and battered, every step through rubble a struggle against frostbite and death. The German siege tightened like an iron vise, cutting off all hope of retreat or immediate resupply. Yet the 101st refused to yield. Communications with Allied command were intermittent. Coded messages arrived, some vague, some stark warnings of the critical situation. Still, McAuliffe remained unshaken. When an officer suggested the possibility of surrender, he responded with his famous single word, "Nuts." Meanwhile, resistance became heroic. Soldiers built barricades from debris and compacted snow. Isolated units banded together, defending key points: the destroyed bridge, the post office, the improvised hospital. Each position struck a blow to enemy morale, proving Bastogne would not fall easily. The Germans, recognizing the Americans' determination, intensified their attacks. Tanks and artillery fired relentlessly, turning narrow streets into corridors of death. But paratroopers quickly adapted, using every building as cover, every rubble pile as a trench. They struck and retreated strategically, bleeding the enemy inch by inch. Then, like a beacon in the winter darkness, reinforcements arrived. Armored units, hungry for battle and fueled by the spirit of rescue, broke through key enemy positions. Cheers echoed through the snow-covered streets as tanks advanced, clearing the way for supplies and medics. Bastogne still bled, but the tide was turning. McAuliffe walked among his men, exhausted yet proud. Each reinforcement was a promise of survival. Each Allied shot, a reminder they were no longer alone. Bastogne had ceased being just a crossroads. It had become a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. The counterattack on the morning of December 24, 1944, snow, smoke, and hope mixed in the air. After days of relentless siege, American reinforcements had finally broken portions of the enemy lines. Bastogne was battered, streets littered with debris and trenches, but the defenders could breathe with renewed confidence. Exhausted, frozen, and hungry paratroopers found renewed strength in their allies' presence. Tanks moved slowly, protecting infantry, while mortars and artillery pounded German positions, cutting their supply corridors. Every explosion was met with hope. The resistance was no longer just holding, it was striking back. McAuliffe coordinated movements with precision. Every liberated street was reinforced. Every enemy position toppled was fortified. He knew victory was not yet guaranteed, but the siege had begun to crumble. When news arrived that large Allied forces were advancing, McAuliffe simply smiled, calm as ever. In the ruined streets and alleys, the fight intensified. Americans advanced house to house, moving between rubble and trenches, firing, kicking down doors, using every bit of cover. Germans, surprised by the resistance and reinforcements, began retreating in groups, trying to avoid annihilation. Each reclaimed meter was both personal and collective triumph. Bastogne still belonged to them. By nightfall, silence descended, no longer deadly but triumphant. Soldiers leaned on each other, sharing cigarettes, laughing nervously, taking in the knowledge that despite the cost, courage had prevailed. Bastogne, the small Belgian crossroads, had become eternal, a place where ordinary men facing cold, hunger, death, and isolation stood firm, where determination and human spirit triumphed over relentless strategy. The legacy of Bastogne winter of 1944 slowly gave way, and with it, the smoke and ice covering Bastogne began to lift. The city was destroyed, its streets scarred by war, but it stood as did the men who defended it. The siege was over, the German offensive halted, and the 101st Airborne and Allied reinforcements had proven that courage could rise even in the most desperate circumstances. Soldiers moved slowly through the streets, aiding civilians, inspecting barricades and burying the dead. The cold still cut, but a warmer presence filled the air, a sense of triumph and accomplishment. McAuliffe walked among his troops, silently acknowledging each face marked by exhaustion and bravery. Words were unnecessary. The men understood that, despite the price, they had defended not just a city, but a principle. Never retreat in the face of adversity. Stories of heroism emerged. The sniper who held an entire street, the medic who saved dozens under fire, soldiers improvising traps with rubble and snow. These acts wove the legend of Bastogne. The town became a symbol of American resilience, a beacon of hope amid the darkness of war. Years later, historians and veterans would remember the Battle of Bastogne as a turning point, a demonstration that courage and discipline could overcome even overwhelming enemy power. The spirit of the Screaming Eagles, steadfast and resolute, would continue to inspire generations, proving bravery is measured not by strength alone, but by standing firm when all else crumbles. Bastogne was no longer just a Belgian town or a strategic point on a map. It became eternal, not for the cold, the destruction, or the tanks and gunfire, but for the human spirit that refused to break. The courage of those who fought there turned a crossroads into a historical landmark, forever remembered as the place where ordinary men became legends.